we go this 4 o'clock hour. There's the dude, the Provo, Utah traveler in Matt Brown. Extra Points joins us on 365 Sports. How was it?
Listen, it was great. It's always a little bit of an emotional experience for me to spend a lot of time out there, especially given the subject matter I was reporting on. But as I'm sure many of you guys here know, that's a fan base that's very friendly, very warm. I probably gained 8 or 9 pounds, I think, the week I was there, just because of the deluge of desserts that are constantly thrown at you. Although I will say, barbecue in your neck of the woods, unfortunately, much better than what you're going to find in Utah County.
Yeah. Well, you didn't. I'm glad you told the people that, Matt. But just so they don't set unreasonable expectations, you went out to find beer drinkers at BYU, which is a needle in a haystack, I'm sure, a little bit. But what was that experience like?
If we had talked a year and a half ago, that would have been my exact reaction too. Like, of course, everybody in this fan base is a Peter Priesthood super Mormon who, of course, they wouldn't be drinking. They're all these people that I've known all my life. But I was actually people within BYU's athletic department that kind of tipped me off about this maybe 9 months ago. Like, we read your Twitter. We know the jokes. Some of them are funny. Some of them definitely not funny. But this fan base is maybe a little bit more complicated than maybe you're giving it credit for. Maybe you should come out and start talking to people. And I'm glad that I did. I had a lot of folks reach out to me. We talked over the phone. We met up in and around the stadium before the game, who either used to be LDS and have since left that faith, or maybe were never Latter-day Saints to begin with. A lot of people that moved in and around Utah for work or for other reasons. Just like you might not necessarily have to be a Baptist to be a Baylor Bears fan. You might grow up near the area or have a connection to a player or a coach and then just jump into that culture either way. And I think one of the big takeaways that I had is that us humans, we're complicated. A lot of us we contain multitudes. We carry lots of different, maybe contradictory identities throughout ourselves, right? Whether it's we believe one thing, but sometimes we have to purchase X, Y, or Z, or we're this, but we're also a member of this other group that's very different. So you have a lot of people that are like, listen, I might feel some kind of way religiously, or maybe I don't see eye to eye with this sponsoring institution, but on Saturdays I can set all of that aside. And I just want to scream and eat 4-foot-long donuts with 60,000 of my new friends here. And if that means that I'm going to enjoy a couple of adult beverages, I'm just going to do it off to the side so nobody sees, and we're going to be okay. And I think there are probably people that are listening to this that might have a similar relationship with Baylor or TCU or SMU or some other places. And I think it's important to see, because we don't always do this well. But when we do, I think college athletics can be a rare institution that legitimately does unite people. And you can set aside political differences or racial differences or religious differences or other things and just focus on what's important at that exact moment, which is that the University of Arizona sucks. And that we're all here to sing and to eat and to root for their demise, and then we'll move on to something else. And if we do that correctly, I think that can be a really beautiful and important thing in America.
Speaking of the foot-long donuts, or actually more than a foot-long, Cougar Tails, did you have one while you were out there?
Oh, I had the Cougar Tail. I went to the BYU Creamery and got the fancy ice cream and like the world-famous chocolate milk that has like chocolate chips in it. I mean, when people found out that I wasn't from there, they're throwing brownies down my throat. You can go to all the soda shops where you can get a Mountain Dew with like 7 other different kind of pumps in it, so it's delicious, but it has 2,000 calories. Like, the whole works. We all have to dull the pain of being alive somehow. Most of us in this country do that with the occasional adult beverage. Most folks in Utah do not, so they decide to do it with sugar. And it's delicious. I thoroughly enjoyed all of it.
Well, that's awesome, man. So that all sounds like a lot of fun, but the product on the field is also a lot of fun right now. Just kind of what did you gather about the spirit of BYU football at the moment with this 6-0 start and everything just looking like it's going in a really good direction right now?
It's so surprising, isn't it? I don't know what you guys thought about this team, but I think most people that followed the Big 12 figured that they were going to be near the bottom. I think the Vegas over-under on this team was 4.5, and I probably would have taken the under. It didn't really add a bunch of huge additions from the transfer portal. They don't recruit at a particularly elite level. Their offense was garbage last year, and a lot of those guys are coming back. And what we're seeing is something you don't see a whole lot in college football, which is just a bunch of guys who stuck around and got better. they have one of the best offenses in this league. And I was really impressed from watching them there. I think about how this coaching staff found ways to scheme people open, to take advantage of the 2 or 3 things that the offense does really well, and then just keep doing them. And then if you're able to keep doing those things and you limit explosive plays, eventually the other team's going to screw up. And you don't necessarily have to be the greatest show on turf to win a lot of games in this league. The ironic thing is that that's kind of how Utah has won over the last several years, with really mean defensive lines and chunk plays and havoc plays on defense and waiting for you to shoot yourself in the foot. It's like a great big Polynesian Iowa, that it wasn't always super fun to watch, but it always wins 9, 10 plus games. And now you're seeing this year, I think BYU is out Utahing Utah, despite Utah having on paper better players, more returning experience, higher expectations. They're not the only team in this league that is playing very differently than how I think you and I would have expected back when we were talking in August. But they're one of the most interesting ones.
Matt, this was one of the craziest weekends and maybe best wall-to-wall weekends of college football ever. Ohio State and Oregon, and even Florida and Tennessee, which probably should have been a close game. I mean, Alabama, South Carolina, Penn State, USC, all these came down to the wire. Is this what we are to expect should the SEC and Big Ten continue their path towards world domination?
It's a good question. And I mean, I still feel like our sample size for this season is small enough that I'm hesitant to draw really sweeping conclusions, other than, hey, this year, I think there's maybe 2 or 3 really good teams, and then maybe teams 4 and teams 16 really aren't that different, which does make for compelling Saturday games. I think it should make the playoff really exciting. I don't know if we're going to see a lot more weeks like this one. Travel does tend to be a great equalizer, because it turns out that flying 3.5 hours and changing 3 time zones is a huge pain in the butt, and it tends to make you a little bit worse at sports. So I'm not going to at all be surprised in the leagues where we have cross-country travel, in the Big Ten and the ACC, even some more in this league, or if you see some upsets or some teams like really fail to cover big spreads. I've seen the reports over the last 2 days about the Big Ten and the SEC getting together in Nashville and thinking about maybe cementing some kind of permanent scheduling alliance, or stepping even more towards taking over the world. And I sent some texts today, and I don't think any of that makes mathematical sense. I'm not saying anybody made it up. I think that whatever television industry sources were saying, that codifying 12 games a year overwhelmingly changes the television numbers compared to all the other costs that go with it. I don't see how that maths. And I'll probably try to write about that a little bit more this week.
Matt, BYU is not in the top 10, but they've moved from unranked to 13. Iowa State, I think, is 9. Both of them are undefeated. Both of them have some nice wins. Should both of them, in your opinion, be inside the top 10?
I guess you have to sit there and think. I'm going to try to pull up the AP top 10 here while we're talking about who you move out. It's kind of unfair for BYU, I guess, that inertia is such a powerful force. And it takes a couple of weeks for people to realize, like, oh, I guess this isn't like a bottom 60 team like we thought. And the SMU that we saw in that BYU game is a very different team compared to now. Like that, I think if BYU played SMU now, I would probably take the ponies. I think Iowa State is perfectly fine in the top 10. I guess the only team that's in there that maybe you could talk me out of that they shouldn't be would be LSU. If you get in the advanced stats, maybe there's not a huge difference between BYU and Clemson, but I feel like the gap between Alabama at 7 and BYU, honestly A&M at 14, I think it's so small that you could configure those just about any way that you wanted, and I wouldn't fight you on it.
Matt Brown, Extra Points, with us on 365 Sports.
Matt, what did you think? You're an Ohio State guy. That Oregon game, what were your thoughts, your emotions, where you went to after Will Howard made that really bad play?
Well, at that point, I think I poured myself a beverage and just kind of sighed there for a second, right? There's what I think emotionally, and then there's what I think rationally as an alleged serious professional in the college football space. The emotional reaction is, we got to send Ryan Day to Siberia. This dude's 2-6 against top 5 teams. There's almost no major wins against anybody that's of equal talent. He's a bearded John Cooper. I'm sick of looking at him. Get him out of here. Which is not unlike a lot of other people in the 614 area code with Twitter accounts. When you look at it rationally, you go, okay, of course that's stupid. This is one of the most successful coaches, not just in Ohio State history, but of nearly anybody else. This team, in many ways not in many ways, they definitely should have won that game. And Oregon is one of the 2 best teams in the country. You played them at their place and had them, snap for snap until some late game execution questions. So I think the big thing for Ohio State is, do you chalk this up as just one of those games, which happens to nearly everybody. And you look at this and think, hey, Ohio State's passing attack actually looks really good. Surely Denzel Burke won't get barbecued like that on every play again. He's has been a very consistent cornerback for Ohio State, and they got the rest of the season ahead of them. They're going to be fine. Or you look at it and say, that's true, but you've had just one of those games now 5 or 6 different times. At what point does it become a habit? Right now, all you have is that everybody in Ohio is very angry, which is not that much different from the baseline emotion from when I remember of Columbus. Like, that's usually an 8 out of 10 on the anger scale. Now we're about a 9.5. By God, they better beat Penn State. If they go into that Michigan game with 2 losses and absolutely needing to get that one to back into like the 9 or the 10 seed, someone's going to perform a citizen's arrest on this coaching staff and make them go take a Chargers job.
Yeah, no question about it. I had a question from somebody who DM'd me on Twitter, Sean Fulton. Smokey, hope all is well. Any chance you guys are having Matt on anytime soon? I DM'd him a question about EA College Football 25. Was curious about potential plans to add the masked rider into the game. My grandfather was the first masked rider, so personally, it would be incredible.
It would be incredible. The masked rider looks pretty great, right? My understanding, and I haven't asked anybody about this in Orlando in a couple of weeks. So you guys might imagine they're a little bit busy right now, or we're a little bit busy with some other things on the hurricane front. But my understanding was that there weren't plans to add mascots into the game this release cycle that weren't part of the game at launch. And part of that is because the animation cycle and work to bring in mascots, given the kind of rebuilt engine that EA is using, it's pretty complicated. They were using live actors for everything, and then they would physically build sets to replicate some of the mascot props, or they would use live actors to emulate horses or other animals, which means that the animations that you see are pretty high quality, but it was harder to scale in the beginning of release, given that they also had to do the same thing for all of the new stadiums and all of the new player models. The as I understand from talking to devs when I was in Florida, is for the next release of the game, you don't have to make a gajillion new stadiums. You might have to add one. You don't need to add a gajillion new player models. You're going to add a couple. So you're going to have more time to either flesh out the stadiums that you maybe cut some corners on before, or add in new mascots. I would not expect any new mascot this cycle for next year's game. Do I think it is probable that there'll be way more Power 4 mascots or way more FBS mascots than before? Yes.
Yeah, you'll have to change the Northwestern Stadium, right? Is that one you might have to redo?
That is, and I remember talking to people about that. So like the if you played the game, it's the old Ryan Field that's in there now, and that's because in 2022, when a lot of these things are being finalized, the on-campus stadium was barely a hypothetical idea. It wasn't something that the university was moving forward to. By the time that they knew this is what we're going to be doing, it was too late. I mean, they were putting the finishing touches on the stadium like as the game was being released. But given the overwhelmingly positive feedback from fans and media, I think there's a pretty good chance that that's going to be in the game for next year. Hawaii would be the other one whose stadium was not built. They used a default, a similar kind of temporary situation where the university officials have told me that for the next game, they very much want the Ching Athletic Complex in the game.
Where are you going next?
Going next. Funny you mentioned that. In 2 weeks, I'm going to Hawaii. Which is not just because I would like to drink something pink and tropical on the beach, although I'm not going to do that. I'm going to bring my wife, but it is actually a work trip. I'm going to be doing a couple of stories on the Hawaii Athletic Department in the midst of their conference realignment change, their structural goals for the university, and then I want to fly with the football team to Fresno. Because as we're talking now about the difficulties of cross-country travel, these guys have been doing it longer than anybody else in FBS, and I want to write about the human cost and toll and scale and kind of scale of bringing that large of a traveling party over the islands here to Central California. So I'll be doing that. Should have a couple of stories in that department, and then we just have the Extra Points Bowl. If you want to go visit beautiful Canton, Ohio in late November, which you're hearing more and more people talk about as a tourist destination. You'll be able to see our bowl game, Division III, at the Hall of Fame Stadium on November 23rd.
I think that's just so awesome that you guys are doing that. And that way you experience what it's like to run a bowl, all the things, and then you have another great article, obviously, to discuss.
Matt, get some Loco Moco while you're in Hawaii.
I will. I'm gonna get the shaved ice. I'm gonna try some spam. I've had spam, but I'm gonna try good spam.
Dole Whip, very good.
Yeah, no. And the last thing I'll mention here on the bowl front, like it's been very educational to be a part of the process of trying to find sponsors, of trying to answer all of these operational questions and things that maybe we take for granted. One of the things that we are pretty close, I'm hoping to be able to pull off correctly here, we've had multiple conversations, is getting some flyovers. There's multiple Air Force bases near here. The Goodyear blimp is stationed within 30 minutes from the stadium. I don't think there's any reason why we can't have the kind of stuff that you see at a Cowboys game or a major college football postseason event at a Baldwin Wallace playoff game or a bowl game. That's what we're going to be trying to do, and it's been fun to learn about what goes into making all that stuff happen.
That's awesome, Matt. Thank you. Appreciate the access. Matt Brown, Extra Points with us. Appreciate the time. And also Sean Fulton, appreciate the question. A DM to me on Twitter at David Smoke.